Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, time to step aside. The winner of Gambia's presidential vote calls on the incumbent Yahya Jammeh to accept his defeat. The longtime leader is under increasing international pressure following his stunning U-turn in a bid to cling to power. Gabon's disputed presidential election overshadowed by inconsistencies. A new EU observers report says clear anomalies call the results into question. And with the political crisis in Burundi forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee, we visit a refugee camp in neighbouring Tanzania. But first, move aside. Gambia's president-elect Adama Barrow has called on incumbent Yahya Jammeh to step down immediately. This after a U-turn from the long-time leader, initially accepting his defeat in the country's recent presidential vote. On Saturday, he changed his mind and now refuses to accept the results. The pressure is mounting from all sides. On Tuesday, leaders from Liberia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone and Ghana are heading to Gambia to try and resolve the crisis. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council met on Monday to condemn Jammeh's backtracking. Take a listen.
They renewed the request to outgoing President Jammeh to respect the choice of the sovereign people of the Gambia and to transfer without condition and undue delay power to the President-elect, Mr. Adama Barrow.
Well, for more details on that meeting, I spoke to our correspondent Jessica Lemazurier, who was at the UN headquarters in New York.
This was a Security Council meeting behind closed doors that was called for by Senegal, which is a non-permanent member of the Security Council at the moment and also shares a border with Gambia. Now, the Security Council expressed its concern over the situation there. The US Ambassador Samantha Power spoke to reporters afterwards and described it as a very alarming situation, a dangerous moment, she said. And she said that they'd heard reports that Jammeh, since he went into retreat, has been in touch with some military leaders and that is of extreme concern to them. So one can only imagine that these discussions behind closed doors centred on how to make him peacefully relinquish power and respect the choice of the people.
France 24, so Jessica Lemazurier reporting there. Well, to another disputed presidential election, this time in Gabon. According to a final report by EU observers released today, clear anomalies during the vote call the results into question. Those results were controversial. Ali Bongo was re-elected in August, clinching victory by a razor-thin margin, defeating his opposition rival Jean Ping, who rejected the results and demanded a recount in a move blocked by the country's top court. Well, let's hear from both the EU observers' Gabon mission chief and the country's foreign affairs minister.
The EU mission has observed particularly opaque processes in the Ougoué province, as well as anomalies within the electoral commissions. These anomalies put into question the integrity of the process, the vote counting, and the final results.
This report comes just at the right moment when the President, His Excellency Ali Bongo Ondimba, has just called a short while ago for a political dialogue that is opening under the leadership of the Prime Minister. These elements, I believe, will certainly be examined by the political leaders.
Next, flags are flying at half-mast across Nigeria's Akwa Ibom state to pay respects to those who were killed when the roof of a church collapsed on worshippers. At least 100 people lost their lives in Saturday's tragedy, which has shaken the southeastern city of Uyo. Meanwhile, in the country's northeast, at least one person was killed when a pair of young suicide bombers targeted a crowded marketplace in Maiduguri. The assailants were two girls said to be just 7 years old. No group has claimed responsibility for the explosions, but the Islamist militant group Boko Haram has been blamed for similar attacks in the past. Well, a fierce campaign to flush out Boko Haram from northeastern Nigeria has revealed a spiralling food crisis, a humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. Hundreds of thousands of people in the country's northeast are on the brink of starvation, and according to the UN, more than 70,000 children are reportedly dying of hunger. Laurent Bersteger has more.
Dozens of skeletal toddlers are receiving life-saving treatment in this Maiduguri hospital. Some are fed through a drip directly attached to their skull, the only place where doctors could find a visible vein.
She's 8 months old, and she weighs only 2.4 kg.
According to aid agencies, as many as 400,000 people, most of them children, are at risk of starving to death next year in Nigeria, a crisis that's been dubbed the biggest on the African continent by the United Nations. Intense fighting against the Boko Haram insurgency has prevented farmers from growing and harvesting crops, sometimes for years in a row. It's also made it difficult for humanitarian convoys carrying food and medicine to reach isolated communities.
Northern part here, there are military operations ongoing, and we humanitarian actors don't have access.
The United Nations launched a $1 billion funding appeal in early December, saying millions could face food shortages and famine if nothing was done. But Nigerian authorities have accused aid groups of exaggerating the scope of the crisis.
We are concerned about the blatant attempts to whip up a non-existent fear of mass starvation by some aid agencies.
Over 2.6 million people have been displaced since the Boko Haram insurgency began in 2009. Many of them now live in refugee camps and directly depend on humanitarian aid to survive.
Named and shamed, Egyptian leader Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has identified the suicide bomber he says was responsible for Saturday's deadly attack on a Coptic Christian church in Cairo. Shafiq Mahmoud Mohammed Mustafa has been blamed for the bloodshed, which killed 24 people, many of them women and children. This Monday, a state funeral was held for the victims, as authorities said they'd arrested 4 people in connection with the bombing. Burundi was plunged into crisis last year when President Pierre Nkurunziza ran for and won a third term in power. The political turmoil sparked widespread violence, which left hundreds of people dead and forced at least 300,000 others to flee the country. More than 18 months down the line, many of them are stuck in refugee camps in neighbouring countries like Tanzania. France 24's Yahya Jammeh and Julie Dungelhoff sent us this report.
The refugee camp of Nduta in Tanzania is a 1-hour drive from the Burundian border.
Okay, so now you go over there.
Every day, hundreds of Burundians cross into Tanzania and are then taken in buses to Nduta. Their country has been in turmoil ever since April 2015. That's when the incumbent president, Pierre Nkurunziza, announced his candidacy for a controversial third mandate. Since then, hundreds have been killed and more than 3,000 people have fled Burundi. Most are now in Tanzania. They didn't expect such a large camp.
I see there are many people here. It makes me think no one's left in Burundi, or at least that half the country's here.
Doctors Without Borders says this is one of Africa's biggest refugee crises.
No one talks about the situation here. The media don't report it. International funding is lacking. There are only a few international NGOs and the Tanzanian government who are helping the Burundian refugees. But frankly, no one seems to care about this crisis.
There are currently no negotiations between the government and the opposition, nothing that might signal that the number of refugees will soon diminish. The camp of Nduta here in Tanzania is already the third camp hosting Burundian refugees in the country. And with 10,000 new arrivals in Tanzania every month, NGOs here tell us they fear there will rapidly be a shortage of funds.
And finally, are you still recreating the mannequin challenge? Because that's old news, at least in Cameroon. The latest internet fad is the Bidung challenge, named after the country's sports minister, Pierre Ismail Bidung Mkpat. He was photographed bowing deeply while shaking the hand of President Paul Biya. Cameroonians have been snapping their own versions of the image, with the craze now sweeping social media. Well, France 24's Observer's team got their hands on a video of the viral trend, combining the Bidung challenge and the mannequin challenge. So take a look at that. suspect a few of those people would have some sore muscles after being stuck in that position all day long. That's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. More news coming up here on France 24. Stay with us.